again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm really, really happy to be joined today by Jo Aldridge, who I've worked with for many years as part of the safeguarding world. She's been a very strong supporter of Nest, and has been a huge support when we receive issues involving safeguarding that we were unable to answer. Jo has always been very, very open, as you said, put them through to me. And she has always guided our clients in the best possible way, and with great results, I have to say. Jo has, well, actually, Jo and Matt both work for an organisation called NWG Network, and that is a charity that was created to combat child sexual exploitation and trafficking in the UK. So a highly powerful organisation. They were funded by Sport England to create Safeguarding Code in Martial Arts, which Jo has headed up for the last 7 years, Jo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe that or not, yeah.
And you guys now have about 1,500 people with the code.
We
right?
do, yeah.
Which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So Jo has had lots of experience in the sports world. She's worked for 2 NGBs prior to this, British Dressage and British Athletics. So she was not new to the world of sport at all when she started this role. And is now, again, case manager at NWG Network. Matt, who now also works for NWG Network. How many years have you been with NWG, Matt?
Since 2021.
Since 2021. Lovely stuff. Prior to that, Matt has had an incredible 30-year-long career in the police force. Now, there is an extensive career path here that I won't go into because I'll be here for a very long time explaining it to you, but a very short overview. Matt worked across 2 different divorce force areas, the Metropolitan Police and latterly Derbyshire Constabulary. It's a difficult word to say, actually. He was a detective inspector who oversaw corruption within the force and went to different forces across the UK to investigate corruption within the force and to help the force understand and avoid bribery and corruption. But also, man more relatable to this, was a detective superintendent and head of public protection, and headed up the department which was responsible for complex sexual abuse and exploitation investigation. So Matt has first-hand experience of scenarios that happen around rape, domestic violence, stalking crimes, and worked in child protection for a long time. So we've brought both here today. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me today and taking the time to talk to our clients and non-clients, in fact. We wanted to bring these guys here to you to explain the importance of safeguarding. You guys know that very well, that's why you're here, but also to give you real life scenarios of what they experience on a day-to-day, the support that they give to people working in the martial arts industry and outside, and how to deal with it. So they're gonna provide real life to you, what that looks like, what you should do if you are ever unfortunate enough to encounter that, also what to look out for to help protect yourself and the people in your community. So I'll be here in the background, guys. I will hand over to you. And guys, if you have any questions, if anyone attending this has any questions, you're able to post a question. If you don't want to do it publicly, you can post a question just to the hosts. So if you want it to be an anonymous question, you can post it just to the host. If you want to know if something's happening, you've experienced something in your club and you're looking for a bit of feedback, please do post it. When we come to the end of this, I'll come back in, deal with the questions, and the guys can give some feedback for you. Okay? So over to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. And I think if you wanted to go one step further, Lou, just thinking if people wanted to add a question but ask us to contact them afterwards for a separate conversation about something, please just add that to the note, and we won't even talk about that in this session. We'd be happy to come back to you on a one-to-one basis, so no problem there. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about the Safeguarding Code in Martial Arts. I am conscious there are a couple of people who are already registered and certified by us, Hooray. Those people don't need to listen to my sales pitch. So if you want to go away for 10 minutes and get a cup of tea, feel free. I think it's just a really good opportunity for me to talk to everybody else about the project and what we try to achieve, and why we think it's important that all the nest management customers jump on board. So I'm going to give you a quick overview, not too long. And then what I really want to do is spend more time talking with Matt about some questions that we've been posed about the safeguarding process following disclosures or allegations that might have been raised in a club, and how we can support you to manage that moving forward. So I think it's important we have more time there, and we're really hoping that will be an interactive session. So we do want to hear from you, and feel free to come up with scenarios or questions that we may not cover if there's anything that is a burning issue for you. As Lou said, we've been more than happy to pick that up at the end of our sort of more scripted session, but happy to sort of go off piste a little bit there. So please raise your hand. Hopefully between the two of us, we can monitor the chat when the other one is talking, so that we can see you. If you have a question along the way, it is honestly not a problem to interrupt me. So feel free to just put your hand up. As Lou said, we are Sport England funded, actually National Lottery funded, and that funding comes through to the NWG Network, who host our project, which has been running since 2018 with the support of Sport England and colleagues at the Child Protection in Sport Unit, which is the NSPCC sport arm, and fantastic colleagues at the Ancraft Trust, which is the charity funded again by Sport England to support safeguarding adults in sport. And there's some great work that happens between all of those stakeholders, along with a key group of national governing bodies that sit on a stakeholder management group, sort of representing safeguarding in the sector, who try to work through issues and hopefully present some useful resources, position statements on certain areas within safeguarding. So I sit on that group as well. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the project's aims, and it's more than this, but I've tried to summarise it really for you. So we are here to support the martial arts sector, in particular the independent or unaffiliated sector of martial arts. So those of you that affiliate to a national governing body potentially have a little bit more support in this area. So the project was initially created to support everyone who doesn't choose to affiliate. Having said that, we do work with all of those national governing bodies and provide everyone with an opportunity to appear on our map that we promote to parents. And all of those clubs within that affiliated sector are more than welcome to apply. So the main aim of the project is to make sure that parents are aware of clubs who are offering good safeguarding standards and therefore providing a positive experience for children and young people, and adults at risk, I should say, as well. And a good basic standards are where we start, but we hope that through your time with us, and many people have been with us for at least 5 or 6 years, you'll be able to learn and grow that. So it doesn't really end at the first sort of level of what we call good safeguarding. I think our Facebook group and the work we do with the NGBs make sure that we're always encouraging continued learning and hopefully building on that work that you do when you initially come to us. We're here to support you and those people that work with you in the club, whether that be volunteers or paid staff, to feel capable and confident in dealing with safeguarding. The saying, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, is so true. And I think recognising that anyone who works in a club and has that interaction with members is in a position of trust is really important. Hopefully you're all aware of the legislation changes a couple of years ago that made that officially, even more important, and something that hopefully everyone has considered in their safeguarding policy, the fact that an offence was created off the back of that legislation change. And I think the key thing for me to point out here is that safeguarding in a club, as Lou sort of mentioned initially, is about considering you and your workforce as well as your members. And I think people always assume this is just about the scary stuff of someone making an allegation against a coach. Actually, a lot of the work that I'm doing in case management is sort of looking from the other side. So have examples of, unfortunately, Lado contacting me with concerns about a coach and that person's mental well-being and how we can support. I might have been approached in the past when a member in a club has died by suicide, as an example, and everyone left behind is sort of struggling to cope with that and looking for some signposting to support. So I think it's important to consider safeguarding as a whole in the club. We also do quite a lot of work to educate parents in alerting them to that the definition of a safe club is really difficult. I mean, we're talking about safe practice, we're talking about safeguarding and everything in between. And what we want parents to understand is that sometimes if things don't feel right or something doesn't look appropriate, that they should feel confident in asking questions, in challenging that scenario and feeling comfortable in raising complaints. A lot of the work that we do is to support clubs in making sure that their complaints process, as an example, is really easy to find, really transparent, and encourages people to raise complaints so that clubs can learn and progress and move on and continue to offer that positive experience and that positive culture. So more parents are asking questions, and I think the point here is be ready for them and be comfortable in answering them. And I get emails quite regularly from parents raising concerns. I had one just last week. So there's quite a lot of work going on there. So alongside that, we also think about all those environments where you might be working and offering your services. So we're doing quite a lot of work with local authorities to educate schools, leisure centres, church halls, anybody really who's hiring a facility. We're spending quite a bit of time trying to talk to people about minimum standards. And from my point of view, that's that the club should be affiliated to a recognised national governing body and or the Safeguarding Code and Martial Arts. So again, be ready for that. If you're operating in Cambridgeshire and you're running an after-school club in a school, you should have already been asked to demonstrate this. As an example, we did a really great piece of work with the local authority there last year, and all the schools in that region were basically told that if they were offering a martial arts club to their children after school, that was a minimum standard required. And the other thing to point out here is that if you're looking for funding from Sport England, you will be rejected unless you can demonstrate that you're, again, affiliated to a recognised national governing body and or you have the Safeguarding Code certification. I spent an hour on the telephone yesterday with a gentleman who has had a funding application rejected and has come to us to work through the process and gain the accreditation so that he can go back to Sport England. So it's another key thing to think about. Okay. So how do we achieve this? It's all free. Key thing to mention. Feel like I need trumpets here, but our work is totally funded. We are a small team, but we're always there to offer support all the way through the accreditation process. So it's an online application that we hope you can manage to work through in your own time, at your own speed, but we are here to help at any point in that process. And we can offer you telephone calls, Teams meetings, whatever you need. We sometimes work with people for a week and they manage to achieve submission of an application. Sometimes it takes people a year. There's no time frame from our point of view. You can take as long as you like and you can use our support as much as you like. So that process is an online application that consists of around 20 different standards in safeguarding. And that's everything from training requirements, which I know the team at Nest provide for you, which is great, some first aid. There's questions about insurance, about safeguarding policies and codes of conduct, as an example. And much of this, hopefully, you already have in place. So it shouldn't be too difficult for you to come online. Few elements of that you need to upload in evidence against your application, and other sections are a simple self-declaration. As an example, we want you to feel comfortable that you have an appropriate safe recruitment process in place, and you will tick a box when you're comfortable that you have that. And we work with anyone and everybody, as I said, clubs of all sizes, associations and franchises can all work with us, and we've adapted the process so that if you look after a number of clubs, you can apply in one application for all of those clubs. So please reach out to us if you want to understand how that works. And as I sort of said earlier, if you're working with affiliated to a national governing body, then please ask if you're not sure. We did have someone signed up, I know, who's the British Judo Club, who's already working with us, as an example. A club affiliated to the British Judo Association doesn't have to actually apply to the Safeguarding Code because they're already achieving our standards. They are automatically awarded on request. So if you're not sure before you start the application and you want to have a look at if that opportunity is available to you, please just reach out, and my contact details are in the presentation here. I've already discussed the support that we have available, but also worth mentioning that Lou and the team at Nest have done an awful lot of work for everybody on the call. So you have an advantage over lots of other clubs in that you do not have to go away and create a safeguarding policy, as an example. You already have one. It's all in My MA, I believe that's what it's called, I think, where all that stuff is stored for you. Lots of templates, lots of guidance and support. So if you do jump on and you realise that you maybe have a gap, you should be able to find that somewhere in My MA, but if not, we can always help point you in the right direction. What happens is once you've completed your application, I should add, it saves along the way for you. So you could do it over a number of days and come back and it will always have saved where you left it. Once you feel comfortable that you could submit that for assessment, it comes through to my colleague Paul, and we normally have reviewed that within 3 working days on average. We say 10 maximum, but I don't think we've ever had to make people wait that long. So pretty quickly you'll hear from us. And it's never a pass or a fail. If there are any gaps that we highlight in your application, we really want to work with you to fill those. So it's never a no. We'll always just offer you some more support and see how we can help you achieve the standards. What that means is then you get use of this logo in your marketing. You can put that on your website, your Facebook page. I know someone is driving it around on the side of a van somewhere. And you get a certificate that's valid for a year, and you get to appear on our Google map that we promote to parents via Facebook. That certificate's valid for a year, and on an annual basis, you'll get a prompt from us to come back in and renew through a sort of a smaller version of the original application. It's a bit more light touch, and for me I think that's a really important sort of diary reminder to think about safeguarding and sort of renew your commitment to safeguarding as a club. It's also an opportunity to review your documents and your processes, and also let us know if anything's changed in your structure. So if you're running 5 clubs last year and you have 6, we want to know. That's a good opportunity to put that extra club on the map for you. So it's a bit of an admin process as well. And my colleague Lucy manages all of the renewals, and as well as an automated email that you receive to remind you, Lucy will also reach out to support you with that. So a quick snapshot of our map. I just wanted to show that to everybody. I love looking at this every morning. It makes me really happy. So as a parent, I can come to this map and I can filter those clubs by postcode within, say, a 5 or 10 mile radius of my house. And there's a drop down menu there, which will even enable me to choose by discipline. So I can search kickboxing as an example, if I want to find somewhere to take my child. And on average, we're receiving 1,000 views a month of that map. So you can see there's a great opportunity there for some free marketing. And that's the key thing there, is hopefully not only will you feel more comfortable that you've got a great safeguarding culture within the club, but you're also finding some new members off the back of that. Okay, what can you expect? Well, from us, as I've said, you'll get just continuing support until you've achieved the standards. And that phrase, without judgment, is really important. I didn't say that earlier. I think it is really important to stress that the team and I are really, we work really hard not to be the tax man. And I think if you come to us and you're starting your safeguarding journey, no one will judge. It's our job to help and support you through the process. And yeah, it's a positive and supportive environment. So please reach out. I think making sure that you're ahead of competition is really important. So think about when you're taking your business to those environments where you're hiring facilities and offering services, being able to show our certificate is really going to help in that process. We talked about free marketing, and we talked a bit about improving standards and being able to demonstrate that, most importantly. And finally, I think it's about having someone to support you if you might need it, if there are any disclosures within your club or safeguarding allegations that are raised with your local authority. And if you're affiliated to a national governing body, you probably don't need this as much, because you'll have a designated safeguarding lead that you can refer incidents to and gain support with. But I think for everybody else, this is a really valuable service. And I have really seen this come to life in the last probably 3 years in particular. I have worked through something like 140 complaints and allegations that have been raised with the safeguarding code by either the local authority and police, or by parents, or by clubs themselves looking for support. So the key message here is this does happen, unfortunately, and we want you to be prepared for it. And we're here to help you with that. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, actually, because I just want to stop and just look to see if we've got any questions or anyone has any comments before we go on to the next section. Anyone who's already certified by us, if you've got anything you'd like to add about how you found the process, or if you've had any support from us, I think it would be great for others to hear that. Please feel free. But if not, I think maybe what we'll do is go into the next section. So we've posed some questions. If you'd like to comment along the way, if you've had any experience of any of the scenarios we're going to talk about, then please feel free to do so, or ask questions of the answers that I'm sort of going to be challenging Matt with. And I also have obviously some experience in dealing with these scenarios, so we'll sort of talk through them together, but please feel free to raise your hands. I think we're good to go. So I'll share again. Okay, can you see that, Matt?
Yep.
I do want to be able to see the chat as well.
It knocks off the chat every time you share, but you can
Yeah.
If there's any questions, Joe, I can see the chat. I'll just
Oh,
check.
you're there, Lou. That's great. Thank you. It's a challenge, isn't it, to see if people are commenting. So please give us a shout. All right. So we'll just go and work through these questions one at a time. And I think it will bring to life some of the real life cases and scenarios that we found ourselves managing. And within the NWG, we work as a team when it's a fairly complicated scenario, I have the ability to take those scenarios to a case management group within the NWG network, of which Matt is a member. And so we work as a group so that there's an independent and I guess broad view on scenarios, because one thing that is for sure is that there's no black or white answer with safeguarding, and everyone sees a scenario slightly differently. So although we're going to try and give you some advice here, I think it's important to say, Matt, I'm sure you agree, that it doesn't mean it's always the right answer in every scenario. And it's good to review each case as an independent, unique opportunity. So the first question that we've been posed is, what should my first step be if a student or parent makes an allegation about one of my coaches? And if that comes through my internal complaints process in the club and or has been taken direct to LADO, I guess, and or the police, because I have worked with a case where someone took their allegation directly to the police as well, rather than internally to the club. So if we start with A, if it comes through the internal complaints process, what do we think is the first step to take, Matt?
Okay, so I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. There's no, within reason, there's no right or wrong answers to these. And the first thing I would always say is don't panic. These things happen. They do happen. Statistically speaking, how many we got on here today? 6. One of you is likely to have to deal with a complaint on the scale of right up to, you know, the serious allegations, right down the bottom to sort of bullying or inappropriate behaviour within the club. Through your internal complaint process. Well, my first thought there is go back to your internal complaint process and what does it say, and follow it. Several of these questions and several of the answers, I'm going to keep saying go back to your policy, because that's what they're there for. The policy is as much for your students to look at and refer to, and as it is for you as either the safeguarding lead or the person who manages the club to refer back to and work with when you get these allegations. Speak to them. Don't shy away from them. Don't panic. Don't immediately challenge it either, I think is the bit to say. Your role is not to make a judgment as to whether what's being alleged happened or not. That will be for others to decide. You have two main, and this is my opinion, you have two main purposes at that point. These change, but at that point, one is to support that individual student making the allegation, or parents, depending on where that complaint's come from. And then secondly, your responsibility to the rest of your students and those people that are temporarily in your care, as it were, for the period that they're using your club. I suppose I'm slightly jumping ahead, but I think that to answer A, they would be my initial thoughts. Where you take that complaint is then really subject to the discussion that you have with either the person concerned or the person concerned and their parents, where they're a child. And a child, for the purposes of these legislation, is somebody under the age of 18, not 16. And there are examples, not just in martial arts, but there are examples where people fall into a bracket between 16 and 18, where we call it being adultified, where they're treated as an adult, but they're not, and you still have got a responsibility to inform parents and involve parents. But as to whether and how you then make or support that person to either report to the police, LADO, social care, whoever it may be, have the conversation with them. What do they want to do? You are not compelled at that point to do anything other than support that individual at that early stage of receiving the disclosure. So I'll stop there.
I'm going to make 2 comments before we move on to B then. The first one for me is it's a mandatory requirement for the safeguarding code that you can demonstrate that you have a reporting route, and that you have, ideally, if your club's of a good size, that you have a welfare officer or designated safeguarding lead that is clearly advertised and promoted within your Facebook group, or on your website, with a private and confidential telephone number or email address. And for me, I think it's actually a good thing that a complaint has come directly through that process into the club. I think that shows that the process works and that people feel comfortable. Where I see this go wrong is where people don't trust the process because there's a lack of independence and they're not sure where that email's going to go or who's going to pick up the complaint or the allegation. That person might then just go straight to the police instead. And or they can't find anybody at all. There's no information. So I think I see A as a positive, and I think the club should. That shows the safeguarding process is working. And the second thing for me was about that approach to the parents, about reassuring them that you are taking it seriously and that you're approaching it without prejudice. I think not showing a bias and believing that the allegation is is potentially true is really important to people that make a complaint. So I think it's about not showing a prejudice, was my second comment. So then what about B, Matt? If someone's gone direct to Lado or the police.
So this presumes then that you've received your disclosure. You now know what you're dealing with in terms of the nature of the allegation. So it can get tricky here because obviously at one extreme it might be an internal inappropriate comment. It might be as low level as some bullying that you can deal with. And I don't want to make light of bullying when I call it low level, but on the scheme of what you could receive as a disclosure, I would put that at one end. That may well be something you can deal with internally, and through working with the individual concerned, you may well have a policy that details how you're going to manage that, as Joe has described, how you're going to manage that. So again, and I will stress this continually, and there's a reason for it, work to your policy. Where a lot of, and it's not clubs, where a lot of statutory organisations fall down with internal investigations or internal complaints processes is that they step outside of their policy, and that's when you can get into all sorts of trouble. Whether that's from a civil law perspective or whether that's subsequent complaints. It doesn't mean you can't step outside of a policy, as long as what you're doing is reasonable and necessary, and that you justify why you're stepping outside of a policy. It may be that your scenario doesn't quite fit that policy, in which case there's a piece of learning. You're going to have to go back and revisit your policy and write something into that policy that would pick that up in future. That's perfectly acceptable. But this is probably the most difficult conversation, where this person may well say to you, I've made that disclosure to you, but I don't want you to tell anyone else. And that's a really difficult one to manage. Now, on the NWG website, we've got the Sport England resources. Feel free to have a look at that. I'll try and put the link into the chat shortly. But there's some great videos in there about how you can manage that conversation. What I would suggest is the stock phrase of, look, you can't keep secrets. And you need to make that clear from the outset. You cannot keep something secret that may either harm them, continue to harm them, or result in harm to other students at the club. And it's surprising, actually. I think people shy away from making that statement because they want to maintain that trust and that rapport that they've perhaps built with the student. But it never ceases to surprise me that actually most people, when they make a disclosure, know full well that you're going to say something along those lines, because deep down, that's what they're hoping for. That's why they've made the disclosure. They trust you. They've told you. And in some respects, they expect you to do something about it. So on the basis that I can't keep it secret if it's going to cause you harm or harm to one of the other students. What I will do, however, is work with you and support you through that process. And it's at that point you can talk about, well, how do you want to do it? Do you want to approach the police direct? Do you want to speak to social care? You can make a referral through LADO, which is the local area designated officer. I'm going to assume some people on the webinar don't know what a LADO is. So it's a local authority social care appointed officer. There's only one LADO in each local authority area. There may be a team supporting that LADO, but it's a named individual. And their role largely is to look at allegations of wrongdoing. I'm going to keep it as broad as that. Wrongdoing by trusted individuals or those working in the statutory sector. So anywhere where somebody's got access to children, largely they would be referred into LADO. And the LADO's role is to coordinate and bring together that information between agencies. So in physical terms, a LADO meeting will largely consider or consist of the police, the local authority, and it will be about sharing, well, what are the police intending to do? Is there going to be a criminal investigation, for example? If not, that same information is shared. Local authority, where does it sit in terms of a child protection matter, or is it low-level safeguarding? And that group will do that. You would be potentially part of that LADO meeting in terms of sharing what you've done, the conversations you've had, and what measures you've put in place to protect children going forward. Don't worry about that, because the other people on that call will support you in that process. It's perfectly acceptable, excuse me, for you to turn up to a LADO meeting and say, look, I really want to put some measures in place to safeguard the rest of the children and those using the club, but I don't know where to start. The expertise around that table, I would suggest, are going to give you a really good start for 10. And of course, the safeguarding code is there to support you with that as well. So that, and then there's an ongoing process, and that probably leads us into the next question, really. But it does depend on whether it's a criminal allegation, obviously, as to whether the police get involved. Yeah, I'll pick that up perhaps in the second question, Jo.
Okay. I have just thought of a second part to that, and we don't cover it later on, so I will just mention it, and that is, what if the scenario is sitting on the other side of safeguarding that we talked about earlier? So we had a situation last year where a member in a club disclosed that they didn't feel safe at home to their instructor that they trusted and felt they could share that information with. And what you do in that scenario is obviously quite different again. And I think it's important for people to note that the local authority avenue to support that person is different to that of your LADO. So the integrated front door, or what else can it be known as, Matt?
MASH. So
MASH, yeah.
Which simply stands for Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, but it's
is the place to go.
More commonly known as the front door.
Yeah. Because I think that's confusing for people as well. And I think important to note that we have, working in sport and running clubs, a duty to report both of those scenarios that we've talked about.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the build up to it, the conversation is largely the same. It's don't challenge what they're saying. They've come to you because they trust you to make that disclosure. If it's about, I don't feel safe at home, the big mistake to make here is it's not relevant to my club, therefore I don't have a role in this, because unfortunately now you do. You know, the phrase that we used at the beginning that Jo used, safeguarding is everyone's business. It absolutely is. You can't, there's a great phrase in policing, you can't unhear what you've heard. And Lou said right at the beginning, and I wrote it down, this conversation, and this will be a running theme, and I'll talk about it in some of the lower questions, is that this is about how to protect yourself as much as it is about protecting those that are using your club's facilities. So yes, it's still a social care referral. I would suggest in the main is probably the easiest way to make a referral, or to encourage that person to make a referral if they wish to. Yeah, you will have. So somebody's put in, this is the MASH for Nottinghamshire. You'll only have one locally. That's quite correct. They're local authority based. They're slightly different depending on where you are, but most are multi-agency staffed. So there's every possibility that there's a police officer seconded into the MASH, somebody from health, somebody from education, and so on. And they will make a very, very quick judgment as to where that sits in their pathway of where it should go next. Obviously, there's a scalar to that. Is this a child protection matter? There's a whole host of legislative pathways that they have to consider depending on what the disclosure is. But this may equally be an adult member of your club who is not feeling safe at home for one reason or another. Process is the same. So the MASH is not just for children. The MASH will take referrals for adults, vulnerable adults. The pathway that it takes is obviously different. But there's support from everything from domestic violence right through to a child who is not feeling safe or is neglected in some way. That's a safeguarding concern. Is that child leaving your club and going home to an empty house for hours on end? Is that what is forming part of that disclosure?
Great. Thank you. I thought it was useful to pick that other side up. So number 2, you're best here to talk through how do the police approach this situation and how does that group of people work together?
Okay, this I could talk probably the best part of the next hour about. It's a very open, broad question, but I'll try and sort of narrow it down. It's not quick. I don't think that will come as a surprise to any of you. Nothing the police do these days is quick. During my time, to be fair, nothing's quick. And I will add to this, it shouldn't be either, because it's complicated and it's sensitive. So time should be taken. So the police will. It depends how the police have received the allegation. It could come through LADO, it could come through the MASH. But either way, the police will be in touch at some point. Now, you could get one of two responses here. You could get a local police officer from the local police station that starts the process. The bit to remember or to keep in your back pocket is they will not be a specialist officer. They'll be a very generic frontline response officer who might not even know the specific legislation, if indeed it's a criminal matter, that this scenario, this disclosure sits into. But they will be able to take a report, they will be able to take the information, and they will start the process. If you're lucky, and I would suggest if it's gone through the MASH or the LADO, it will have gone straight to a specialist officer. What's different there? You skip the timeline slightly in that specialist officer will receive specialist training, will be experienced, and will be able to start the criminal investigation probably a little quicker than had one of their uniformed colleagues attended in the first instance. So what does a criminal investigation look like? Well, you've got the initial information, you've got the recording. They will be considering what the nature of that allegation is. Is there a forensic element to it? Does this person need to be supported medically? So it's all about, in those initial stages, the person who's making disclosure and supporting them. Not taking statements, not interviews, not arrests necessarily. It would have to be at the real top end, real risk existing for immediate arrests to start taking place. However, that will come at some stage potentially. So let's just skip ahead slightly. Your person has made the disclosure. The officers have looked into it. They will establish if there's any witnesses, what other evidence is there to support this disclosure. And at some stage, it's highly likely a video interview will be conducted with the victim. Once they've accumulated that evidence, that's the next stage, is then to speak to the suspect. And they will either invite that suspect in for a voluntary interview or they'll make an arrest. I'm not going to go into the full details as to what makes that decision right or wrong for the police. There's a wealth of reasons that could sit behind that. But nevertheless, I would suggest an interview will take place at some stage. And that is effectively their opportunity to put their side of the story across as to, and often, as you'll have seen on the TV, I'm sure some people choose not to take that opportunity and will go no comment. All that is collected up by the police at some stage, and as I'm saying it, it feels very quick, but it isn't, and I accept that. But at some stage, the police will then make a judgment call as to what they've got in front of them, and does it amount, one, to a criminal offence, two, have I got sufficient evidence now to take this to the Crown Prosecution Service? And the important thing to remember here is that the police are not a prosecuting agency. The Crown Prosecution Agency decide whether whether people get charged and whether people go to court for the offences that are investigated by the police. Where it is referred to the CPS, you're now into another timeline altogether, because it will have to be allocated to a lawyer to review the investigation. They may well ask for more investigation to be conducted if they feel that there are evidential gaps in it. That will be sent back to the police and for those inquiries to continue. So that, as you can imagine, can take months and in some cases years on the bigger allegations that you probably hear about on the news. At some stage, a decision is made by the Crown Prosecution Service. Generally speaking, that's one of two ways. It's not always quite as clear-cut as this, but for the purposes of today, it will either be no further action, and that is not because they don't believe the victim or they don't believe it happened. It's because what they're saying is we can't take any further action on this based on the evidence. There is insufficient evidence to charge. And that's just the requirements of the law. That's very cold, and it's not great if you're the victim or the parents or the witnesses in that process. But that's the reality of it. Alternatively, they may well say charges are to be made, in which case the police will have the individual back in. They'll be charged formally, and then a court date set up. I won't go into the court processes because that's again another timeline that adds to those months and years potentially. What will be important is, and it comes in further down, is what's your role in that timeline? And it's one generally of support. What it doesn't do, and it's the big bit that I get in a tiz about when I'm dealing with police forces now, and with clubs or agencies where they've received a disclosure. Just because there's a criminal investigation, that does not exclude your responsibilities to conduct your own internal processes. There's a question further down that you'll have seen around suspension. I'll wait till we get to that. But often what you'll see people say, or you will have heard people say, is, and I will call it for what it is, it's a cop-out. You can't simply say there's a police criminal investigation ongoing, therefore I can't do anything, or we must stop our processes because of that. I get the danger, and the danger is that you in some way overstep the mark, or you conduct a process that may interfere with the criminal investigation. I get that, and that's understandable, and you absolutely shouldn't do that. But making some decisions about how you safeguard the person who's made the disclosure and how you might safeguard the children at your club are still questions that you must answer and deal with, irrespective of whether there's a police criminal investigation ongoing or not. And I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stop sharing because I think it's probably better that people can see us, and what I'll do is I'll read the questions, but I think it's a good place to stop and just see if anyone has any thoughts, comments or questions about everything that's been covered so far, because there's a lot there, and as Matt said, you could probably talk for an hour just on those 3 questions. Has anybody got anything they want to ask Matt about what he's shared so far, or any comments to make before we move on to the next one?
I suppose the bit I would just add while people are thinking about questions is, for example, if you get that local response officer who comes and goes, well, it's not, and I've seen it, I'm the first to put my hands up and say I've seen it, and I've had to deal with it when I was still a police officer. And that is where that officer is a bit laissez-faire about it, is a bit, well, it's not really a matter for the police. If when you're hearing that, you think to yourself, that doesn't feel right, what I'm describing here is wrong, and I don't think it's not a matter for the police, I don't agree with that officer, then you must say so, or you must escalate it, because you're probably right. In my experience, it's all too easy for a police officer, and I'm desperately trying to think of a crime type that your average police officer won't be familiar with, but there are lots. No one police officer knows all the law. It's impossible. I don't care whether you do 30 years, 50 years, because the law changes. I can't tell you how many times legislation has changed in my time in policing. So you're forever trying to keep up with what legislation there is. But if it feels wrong, it probably is. And if you're sitting there thinking this feels like a matter for the police, it probably is. So don't let that put you off.
I think the flip side of that, Matt, that I've seen quite a lot is that people don't want to believe it has happened, and that someone that they have worked with for 20, 30 years could be capable of the nature of that allegation. And I think those situations, sadly, do happen. And being able to remove yourself from that relationship that exists to manage that process effectively is really difficult. And where have seen people work through that effectively is where they've removed themselves from the process and allocated that role to someone who is more independent of that relationship. But having to suspend an instructor that you have worked with for all of your professional career is a really difficult situation to find yourself in, and that unbelievable notion that can't have happened can maybe sway you to make difficult decisions in the wrong way. And I think it's important to try and somehow remove yourself from that. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And if your instructors or your board or the governance within your club have all bought into your safeguarding policy, have all bought into your complaints policy, safeguard, all those policies that sit there. And I go back to that statement at the beginning, that those policies, and I include the option around suspension of an instructor, are as much there to protect you and the instructor whilst there's an ongoing investigation from additional allegations, from from them saying something that they might regret whilst they're in the club, and so on. And it's as much, if you're the person that's financially tied to your club as well, this is about protecting you as well. So they're all, there's a wealth of argument and reasons, and we'll come on to it in a second, as to why you should consider suspension. You don't have to do it, but it's an option. It's one that should be considered. And I completely get how difficult that will be for a colleague who you've worked next to for many, many years, may even be a friend, a good friend, someone you've come through martial arts together with. But if they're an instructor and they're subject to those policies, they will have bought into them. So they, professionally, they should expect you to do what you need to do.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a bit more then. So questions 3 and 4 were about the internal process that happens alongside the criminal investigation and suspension being a part of that, and what the view is on those two.
Okay.
Hand in hand, I guess.
It's my opportunity to repeat myself again, because I'm going to say go back to policy. Keep going back to them. Now, in an ideal world, it gives that policy will contain every option for every scenario. Unlikely, but it will certainly give you a start for 10. And then you can obviously reach out to Safeguarding Code, to your governing body, or whoever for that support. It may be the Lado can give you some advice or signpost you as well. But you've got 2 options now. One is, I would suggest that the 2, and I'll come back to them. The 2 bits you've got now are risk assessment and your own investigation, your own clubs have a look at this as a complaint. There may well be a criminal allegation running in parallel, but there's also your complaints policy. So let's deal with the safeguarding risk assessment first and foremost. You've got two people, you've got three groups of people largely. One is the person who's made the disclosure. Now, they may well want to continue coming to the club. Let's say the scenario is the allegation is against another instructor. They may well still want to come to the club. Parents may well say they're not coming to this club at all, whilst that instructor is still present and around. That's probably not a bad shout, because if there is a criminal investigation running parallel, then some distance between those two individuals is good, is healthy. You can assist that, and that's where you start to get into, okay, is it feasible within the club? And you've got to start looking at what are called amelioration measures. How do you manage this risk? So one is, can I practically keep these two people separate? Do I have evenings where this person doesn't teach, for example, and that student could come on those evenings? Is that logistically possible? In bigger clubs it is. In smaller clubs it generally isn't. So if it isn't possible, okay, then I've got to look at something else, until you get to the point where you say, okay, in order to protect the person who made the disclosure, and in order to protect, and these are the three groups, the other group is obviously your other students, in order to protect the other students, and in order to protect the integrity of not just the criminal investigation, but the integrity of your internal complaints investigation, I need to protect the instructor. And one of the ways you can do that is through what we call the neutral act of suspension. Okay? Suspension is not a judgment. If you're suspended from work, it doesn't mean that you are guilty of that offence. And I know what I'm saying. You know, I can almost feel people when I talk about this going, yeah, I bet it is. But it is. Within the HR environment, employment law, it's a neutral act that's taken to protect not just the person making the disclosure or the children at your club, but also the individual concerned, because it creates that space for these processes to take place. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's a difficult conversation to have. And in some scenarios within the martial arts world where people make a living from it, that's even more difficult, because you are potentially suspending their ability to earn a living. However, that shouldn't really play too much of a role in your risk assessment. So I would suggest your complaints process should cover the option around suspension. It should detail where you feel suspension might be appropriate. It should detail the support that will be given to that individual during suspension away from the club. It's not something that you do and you say to them, right, we'll be in touch in the future when this is all over. No, there is a duty to support them and to stay in touch with them all the way through. Really difficult. I don't underestimate the conversation. I've personally been involved in suspending police officers subject to investigation on occasions because of either something that's happened in their private life where they've been involved in martial arts. There are examples of that. And they've ended up being suspended as a police officer because of the nature of that role. Really difficult, really very difficult, but necessary and appropriate in some circumstances. So it should exist within your policies. If your complaints policy doesn't have suspension covered in it, this is where it gets tricky for you, because you've got to almost feels like you're making it up on the hoof then. And that's when it makes the decision or the discussion even more difficult, because the person concerned will feel like it's being made up on the hoof. If it's detailed in your policy and shared amongst your instructors and your governance and your parents and children, then they can all see, you know, this is the process we follow. You understand that, you signed up to it. This is what we're going to do. And these are necessary because I need to manage the risk. And it's only for the period during which either the criminal investigation is running and or we complete a internal complaints process. I'll just come to the complaints process itself. There is no legal obligation for you to suspend your complaint process whilst there is a criminal investigation going on. In my experience, and I've seen, for example, I investigated a rape within a hospital many years ago, And the NHS attitude was, oh, we will sit back and wait for the outcome of the criminal investigation. Absolutely not. Why are you doing that? You can carry on. You've got decisions to make around suspension. You may even want to. It was so clear cut, by the way, so clear cut that I encouraged them to get on with their process, because they're not bound by the criminal threshold. They're two very different things. They ended up following their HR process, and that individual was sacked from the NHS because, on the balance of probabilities, what they'd done happened. It was not beyond all reasonable doubt, and actually it didn't go to court because the CPS made a call that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. So you don't need, because I think what people do is they think, well, I'll just wait and see what the outcome of the criminal investigation is, because if that person's arrested, charged, and goes to court and is found guilty, that then makes my process that much easier. I can just get rid of them. That means you could be waiting for 2-3 years with all this hanging over the club. No, you don't need to do that. Just be mindful that whatever your process is doesn't cross over and interfere with the police criminal investigation, and you can do that just by simply updating them, talking to them, and telling them that's what you intend to do.
I think there's also there's some elements of your process that you can review during that investigation that are important as well, like how and why this might have happened, and it's worth taking that time to understand. If there's, as an example, is there an opportunity for a coach to message a member one-to-one privately that created the allegation? And so is there something that needs addressing in your process to make sure that never happens again? You can do that anyway, can't you, alongside that criminal investigation, and take the opportunity while it's fresh and, you know, to do the right thing. We've lost quite a lot of people, I think, because we've talked for so long, but I am conscious Lou put a question in here that links to the next scenario we wanted to talk about bail conditions. So Lou said, is the club owner legally obliged to suspend the coach while the investigation is ongoing? It sort of links to bail, if you want to pick that up. And I think if the couple of people that are remaining with us are happy to stick with us, we'll keep going.
So legally obliged is a very difficult phrase to get around, because there's no specific legal obligation or legislation that says you must suspend as the coach or as the head coach of a club. And I'm going to slightly then contradict myself, because what your legal obligation is to the person making the disclosure, the other children and vulnerable adults at your club. You have a legal obligation to them. And in order to protect them and safeguard them, one of your options is to suspend that coach. So in a roundabout way, yes, you are legally obliged to consider suspending them. It might not be appropriate because you can manage it another way. Speak to the police, and I think you'll get two responses, unfortunately. You'll get one where, well, it's a matter for you, they don't want to get involved. But I would like to think that, you know, they would at least say, well, look, we don't think the risk is thus. We think this is isolated. We think it's this. That may inform your decision making. Where it becomes probably a little bit more clear cut is if that person is arrested quite early in the process. That gives you some indication of the risk that the police might feel is present. And two things may well happen. They may be released on police bail. And the police can put conditions on that bail, and those conditions can be things like not to be in the company of a child under the age of 16 or 18 without another adult being present, not to contact directly or indirectly the person who's made the disclosure and or witnesses that are named. There can be anything, quite honestly, any restrictions imposed on police bail. You might be in a position to support that with a suspension. Because clearly, if that person can't be in the presence of a child, or can't contact directly or indirectly the person concerned, well, then they can't be at the club. It goes without saying. So I think in some respects, that makes life that little bit easier for your decision around suspension.
Yeah. I'm going to move on then, so we don't run out of time. We have another question about how we manage questions from parents and staff when an allegation is made. And there are two different audiences, aren't they, with two different scenarios to consider. What would your advice be there?
So they are different, but they can very quickly become the same, and I'll explain why. So you've got parents, for example. Parents are going to want to know what you're going to do. You know, they are going to be angry. They are going to want to see some action. It's emotive. So you can share your policy with them. I would suggest, first and foremost, I've got a policy to follow now. Within that will be some conversations with the police, for example, where I will decide what measures we can put in place to protect your child going forward and to protect the other children and vulnerable adults at the club. And one of the options available to me is suspension, which I will be considering. They will be putting pressure on you to go straight to suspension. How can they possibly? Blah, blah, blah. It just takes a bit of management, because what I would suggest you do is follow a line that says, look, we've got a policy to follow. I need to follow the policy because that's what everybody's signed up to as a member organisation. So, but I think the key bit is to maintain that communication with the parents. Don't always wait for them to keep ringing you up or texting you what's happening. Be proactive about that communication, because I think certainly in my experience, if you're proactive about it, it's easier to manage it. People want to be informed. How do you manage the inquiries from the rest of the club? That's perhaps even more difficult, because initially they probably aren't aware of the extent of a serious, let's use a serious allegation, for example. And I think you keep it bland. You know, there's been a complaint made, and for the time being, instructor A is going to take some time out and not teach at the club for a period of time whilst we have a chance to look into the nature of the complaint. And you can keep it as bland as that. If anybody, what I would put, and you've got to tread a little bit carefully here, because this is something that the police may well want to do as well, because in complex inquiries there might be more than one victim. So there will be what the police will do is set what's called a victim strategy, and that is, are we going to canvass other people to see if they've been a victim of this individual, and how are we going to do that? Because there's a lot of care that needs to be taken about how you approach somebody who hasn't made a disclosure but you think might well be a victim. That's really difficult, and I would suggest that's a matter for the police. But as a club, if anybody wants to talk to me about this matter, or the welfare officer, here are the contact details. Here is our policy. Here is the route through which you can do that. Just reaffirm your policy and your procedures each time, I think is where I would go with that. Eventually, the rest of the club are going to know, either because the parents have been vocal about it, it's going to get out more and more. But I think, again, be proactive whenever you get the opportunity to talk to the wider club. I'm conscious that there's a lot of chat about instructor A. You know, it really doesn't help the process. It doesn't help the person concerned who made the disclosure. Let's work, you know, reassure them the club is working with the police and the authorities, and that there'll be a process, and you'll, insofar as you can, you'll keep them updated. Always goes a long way to sort of managing those difficult communications.
And supporting both parties independently through the whole thing is important, isn't it? So if the person that made the allegation wants to find a way to continue to train, then it's trying to work through that and support them, at the same time as being aware that this can be a really mentally challenging situation for an instructor to find themselves in, and that person might need some support. As long as you're doing both and being neutral, as you mentioned earlier, I think that's a good place to be, isn't it?
Your policy should reflect that. You know, your welfare officer, your dedicated safeguarding lead, whatever you call them, has a responsibility to both parties. They're not just there for those who make disclosures. They're there for those who find themselves on the end of these disclosures as well.
So the last question, well, it's two questions. One's about the safeguarding code support, but the last one for you is about the responsibility to complete an internal review. And you did sort of touch on this earlier. I think the key thing that maybe we haven't talked about that's worth going back to on that internal review is that to keep in mind in complicated situations, you may need some independence, some external support in managing that. Marking your own homework scenario is never a good thing. And if there's a way for you to get some external support, and it's not always necessary, obviously it depends on the level of the allegation, the severity of the allegation, doesn't it? But where we have seen situations go wrong, in particular over the last couple of years, it's where an internal review has been conducted by an internal team. And I think that's an important note.
It is. I would always say that where you get allegations of this nature, that whoever is appointed to do that internal process should be somebody with some knowledge of the sector. And the reason I say that is because not just because of independence. Let's face it, independence is going to cost, and that might be prohibitive for you as a small club. Not the end of the world. You can speak to the code, you can speak to the NWG. We may be in a position to support you with that. That's not a commitment, by the way, but speak to us in the first instance. I think what I would say is there's a lot of hurdles when you conduct those investigations and when you write it up, and for whatever process there is, whether there's then a safeguarding committee that would consider what's found within that investigation and whether they wish to then impose a sanction, irrespective of the outcome of a criminal investigation. Just because a criminal investigation has not met a threshold for prosecution does not mean that they've acted within your processes and policies within your club and that a sanction isn't appropriate internally. How that report is written, the language that's used, can often be seen as defensive on the behalf of the club or defensive on behalf of one of the parties. It has to be really balanced. There's a real skill in how you write up an internal investigation. But yeah, I think again, go back. What does your policy say? Follow your policy insofar as you can. And if you're going to either step outside of it or you're going to add to it because it's not currently within there. The key bit for me with investigations is not about sanctions necessarily. It's about learning.
Yeah.
How do I learn from this? What recommendations can I pull out of this internal review that means, one, the process is easier next time, i.e. I've got to update my policies, or two, protecting children going forward. What can I put in place that would stop this in the future? Are the priorities for me? Of course, if that instructor has to go, then that's a sanction and something you'd have to decide on internally. But and conversely, it may be that you now need a plan as to how you are integrating that instructor back into the club, because if there is nothing as a result of that investigation, police investigation's been NFA'd, your internal investigation has found that there's no evidence or there's nothing to support this allegation, it may be that you're reintegrating this instructor back from suspension. That can be a challenge. So that needs a plan and a conversation with the parents of the person concerned, with the child, with the person who made the disclosure, and so on. It's dead easy for me to sit here and rattle that off. I completely appreciate how difficult that is. But you don't need to do it on your own is the key bit. There's plenty of support out there.
Yeah. So the last part for us was about support from us at the NWG. And I think the key thing for me to point out is if you're registered with us and working towards achieving the standards of the Safeguarding Code or already certified, we will absolutely support you through any of the scenarios that we've described earlier, and it's within our remit to do that. Where it gets a bit tricky is if you're coming to us and you're not certified by us and we have no knowledge of the club and you've not taken the time to work through the process with us. Officially, Matt will slap my wrists if I get involved in that situation. However, he knows that if someone comes to me and there's risk involved, I will always pick it up and offer support and advice and guidance, and we'd be really happy to help you through a process. So I think always ask us in the first instance. Lou will share my contact details, hopefully. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that might come up after the session. Please feel free to email me with any of those. And I'm sorry we lost so many along the way, Lou. Hopefully we haven't talked for too long, but is there anything that you think we haven't covered that you would like us to answer?
No, I don't think so. I think that's the majority. I think what you've covered off is generally what I hear from our clients, that an allegation has been made, a complaint has been raised, and then our clients are just unaware as to what to do next. I think talking about the policy is absolutely key. If you have a policy, and I get this a lot, we say, please go back to your policy. They've never read their own policy. So even if you have a policy, that's not enough. You have to read it and know it so you're able to answer and you're not on the hoof, as Matt was saying before. Just know it because it backs you up. It's protection for yourself. So yeah, that's
it's a really good point. Paul Stewart, the footballer, I once listened to him and he said a line that stuck with me forever, that is, your safeguarding policy should have legs and it should walk around your club. And it's not just for you, and it's not just to be sat in a drawer, it's for your parents and carers and members. It should be easily accessible and everyone should have access to it and be able to read it. It's really important, and it just starts there, doesn't it? And we could talk about codes of conduct and all sorts of other interesting things as well that become relevant in a safeguarding concern management, but we haven't got time, so maybe we'll do a number 2 session at some point if you get more questions off the back of this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we have overshot a bit, lost a few people on the way, but this is good because they will probably come back and watch the rest of it on the recording. So look, I thank you very much for spending so much time with us, for answering the questions. It's been really useful, particularly for me as well. So when I speak to people, I'll have a better understanding myself of what guidance to give. It all makes perfect sense. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I hope the guys who've been on here have enjoyed it and appreciated it, and it's given them some food for thought. Anthony, thanks. It's thought-provoking. Yeah, and Laura, thank you so much. So yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for those attending. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Nice to see you, Lou.
And we'll catch up.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.